And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West. And the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's January the 16th. The 16th day of this new year. Just 349 days remain to the year's over with, and we'll start a new one. Holidays and observances. It's National Fig Newton Day, International Hot and Spicy Food Day, National Religious Freedom Day. Religious freedom, of course, is the idea that everybody has the right to practice their beliefs openly and without persecution. National Appreciate a Dragon Day. These mythical creatures can fly and breathe fire and hoard treasure. With their strength and majesty, they ignite the imagination and spark adventures. National Good Teen Day, guiding the future generation during their transformative years. National Without a Scalpel Day, enhancing health through precise medical techniques, utilizing advanced imaging for minimally invasive procedures. National Quinoa Day, getting in popularity over recent years. Quinoa offers all sorts of nutritional benefits for health-conscious people. National Nothing Day. Take a break from activities of any description, revel in moments of insignificance, or contemplate the metaphysical meaning of nothingness. International Rooibos Day. Aromatic brew from South Africa, known for its rich and earthy flavor and a comforting warmth in every sip. And Book Publishers Day, Artes Mundi, Farmhouse Breakfast Week, savor a satisfying morning feast, relishing diverse flavors to energize and start the day on a high note. And Pongal, which is a vibrant harvest festival, celebrated great enthusiasm in South India, honors the sun and nature and the farmers that brought the food to the table. Famous people born in this date: Aliyah and then Manuel Miranda. That note, let's go see what stories we have in the news on this interesting day. The unearthed filings shows top teachers union is funneling millions to far-left organizations. They call it social justice unionism. One of the nation's most prominent teachers unions funneled millions of dollars in union funds to far-left activist groups, ballot initiatives, and social justice organizations, according to federal labor filings. November Form L2 disclosure from the National Education Association, filed in November and obtained by the North American Values Institute, shows 2024 fiscal year spending that involved millions given to social justice-oriented groups and far-left causes. The NEA, which boasts more than 3 million members, sent $300,000 to the 1630 Fund, a liberal dark money group for Fox News Digital, as reported on extensively, and tens of thousands of dollars to the Tides Foundation Network, which Fox News previously reported has ties to anti-Israel protests and a variety of far-left causes. Among the largest expenditures is more than $3.5 million sent to the Education International, a global teachers federation where NEA President Becky Pringle serves as vice president. That filing also details the hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing to organizations backing ballot initiatives aimed at reshaping education policy and education laws in states, including Ohio, Massachusetts, Arizona, and Wisconsin. Some of these teachers groups need to learn something about the people they're supporting. Well, Minneapolis mayor who told ICE to get the F out now calls for peace after another shooting incident. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey Wednesday called for peace in a escalating protest. Sharp shift in the tone after he demanded days earlier the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement get the F out of the city. He appeared on a late news conference after an illegal immigrant from Venezuela was shot in the leg after he allegedly ambushed a federal agent with a shovel. I'm calling for peace, he told reporters. Everybody has a role in achieving that peace, and we're going to try and end everything we can to keep it. The Fry repeatedly condemned ICE's immigration enforcement operations and again called for ICE to leave Minneapolis. He says there's still a lot that we don't know at this time, but what I can tell you for certain is that this is not sustainable. This is an impossible situation that our city is presently being put in. And we're in a position right now where we have residents that are asking a very limited number of police officers that we have to fight ICE agents on the street. We can't be at peace right now in America where we have two government entities that are literally fighting each other. Well, they're doing everything they can to protect the criminals, which I find fascinating. American Hotspot's been slapped with the worst tourist destination in a new global analysis. Recent reports shining a light on popular destinations considered the worst for tourists to visit because they fall short of the hype they've received over the years. Analysts looked at more than 100 tourist attractions around the world and came up with a list of the worst destinations that underwhelm visitors when, despite their global fame. Stasher, a travel company specializing in luggage storage, released the findings based on Google reviews ratings, TikTok engagement, airport accessibility, country safety, and local accommodation quality. Getting the worst label of all was the Hollywood Walk of Fame in Los Angeles. Located 23 miles from LAX, Sidewalk of Celebrity Stars has the lowest Google rating and safety score according to analysts. Well, some of the things that the media has hyped over the years really don't make any sense. Well, two Florida teams were buried alive in a deadly sand tunnel collapse. Florida community's reeling from the deaths of two teenage best friends who lost their lives while enjoying a day in the sand. George Watts, 14, and Derek Hubbard, 14, were digging a hole and tunneling a sand pit near Sportsman's Park in Inverness, roughly 70 miles north of Tampa. That happened January 11th. They were just kids. Corey Edwards, their coach and mentor in the 352 Legends program, told the outlet. They were just kids doing what we try to tell kids to do, go outside and play. The hole was about 5 feet deep when it reportedly collapsed on the two teens. Unfortunately, with the weight of the sand, when it hits, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. Well, a prosecutor's child witnessed Charlie Kirk's assassination. And the question is, can he take part in the case? The story's from Provo, Utah. Defense attorneys for the Utah electrician accused of assassinating Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk want the Utah County Attorney's Office disqualified from handling the case because a member of the prosecution team had an adult child who was present for the murder. Legal experts are split on whether the connection constitutes an actual conflict of interest. According to Donna Rutano, a Chicago criminal defense attorney and Fox News contributor, this is one of those motions that she found ridiculous. Normally, she likes to see a vigorous defense and attorneys doing everything they can to protect their client, but this is one that she found very frivolous in nature. Be a conflict if the relative's presence had in some way was able to influence the case, but if the family member was the victim, maybe this is an issue. If Erica Kirk was related to a prosecutor, they'd have more ground to stand on. Typically, a prosecutor can be recused or disqualified from a case if there's a conflict of interest that would jeopardize the defendant's right to a fair trial. With such a high-profile shooting at a public event in a small town, the connection may not be so unusual. Well, attorney generals leading the Save Women's Sports legal team in the Supreme Court battle reveal expectations for the court's decision. The attorneys general leading the legal defense in the ongoing Supreme Court battle over trans athletes have optimistic expectations for the forthcoming ruling. Oral arguments on Tuesday left most pundits believing a majority of the justices appear to prepare to rule in favor of Idaho and West Virginia's right to uphold laws to keep males out of women's sports. Idaho Attorney General Raul Labrador and West Virginia Attorney General John McCuskey also expect to win, although on different terms. McCuskey boldly declared he's expecting the court to deliver a unanimous 9-0 decision in the state's favor. Well, that may be true. I mean, the very idea of men and women competing in the same sports sounds a little, well, I guess the best word is stupid. Especially when you've got people wanting to compete as different sexes because of the way they identify. Their identifying doesn't have anything to do with reality. Well, President Trump knows good real estate when he sees it, and he knows Greenland's value to national security. He said on Truth Social Wednesday, the United States needs Greenland for the purpose of national security. It's vital for the Golden Dome that we're building. And he's right. Grab a globe and take a look down from the North Pole, or check out an official Pentagon map. And you see Greenland is pivotal to the Arctic front. Greenland's eastern coast guards the Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom, or GUK as it's called. This is the entry gate to the Atlantic for Russian President Vladimir Putin's nuclear-armed submarines. And Greenland hosts important early warning radar sites because its field of view covers so much of the bomber and missile flight routes from Russia and China. No Greenland, no Golden Dome missile shield. So we'll see if it becomes the 51st state. Well, Jay Leno has rejected Hollywood pressure to get a girlfriend and stays devoted to his wife, who has dementia. He continues to stand by his wife during her battle with advanced dementia, a decision that has stunned some in Hollywood. Former Tonight Show host revealed that while caring for his wife for 45 years, Mavis, some people have reached out with disbelief and even suggested he go find a girlfriend. He said, you take a vow when people get married and people are stunned. They're so shocked that you'd live up to it. He doesn't know why. He appeared on the Life Above the Noise with Maria Shriver podcast. Shriver reacted in sickness and in health. Then when there's a sickness and you're there, you're seeing people are like, whoa. And all said the most surprising comment came straight out of Hollywood. He said his favorite thing was, and this is the most Hollywood thing, one guy said to him, so you going to get a girlfriend now? I said, no, I have a girlfriend. I'm married. Been married 45 years. He said, yeah, but you know what I mean? No, we're kind of in this together, you know. You can't go, honey, I'll be with my girlfriend. I'll be back later. That's the most Hollywood thing. It just made him laugh, he said. Well, Australia removes 4.7 million kids from social media platforms in the first month of their historic ban. Social media companies have removed access to millions of accounts belonging to children in Australia in the first month since the country's historic ban took effect. Growing platforms such as Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok to identify and deactivate users under the age of 16. Access was revoked for roughly 4.7 million users, according to Australian officials. On Friday, they touted the early success of the law that was enacted in mid-December amid fears surrounding the impact of online environments on young people. And certainly, some of these sites do not need to have young people on them. Iran's ethnic minorities could hold the key to the regime's fate as protests continue. Even as the anti-regime protests seem to slow down Friday, experts say there's a major part of the country that could help decide the future of the country, and that's Iran's complex ethnic minority population. Makes up just under 50% of the population. Shakir Rodost, a leading academic expert in Iran's minorities who was born and raised in the Kurdistan region of Iran, told Fox News that ethnic groups from the establishment of the Islamic Constitution in 1979 did not support it and been fighting for their rights for 47 years. According to a new paper authored by Rodost, Iran's protests have spread across provinces despite skepticism and concern among ethnic groups. She notes that 51% of the country is Persian. Azeris make up 24%. Kurds compose 8% to 17% of the nation. Arabs and Baluch minorities number 3% and 2% of the population. She wrote that Iran's a country with about 93 million people whose modern state was built around a centralized national identity rather than ethnic pluralism. So we'll see if the uprising continues. Well, a tear down the wall moment in Iran will damage both the Islamic Republic and China. Having directly demonstrated a willingness to use American military might in the B-2 strike on Iran's nuclear facilities last year that brought the 12-day war to an end, President Trump is robustly supporting the brave Iranian people now entering their third week of protest against the theocratic regime that has suppressed them for so long. President Trump's response to the Iranian protests couldn't be more different from President Obama's to the 2009 Green Revolution. Just days after Obama gave a speech in Cairo called A New Beginning, in which he offered an outstretched hand to the mullahs in the hopes of diplomatic engagement, Iranian people inconveniently flooded into the streets to protest an obviously fraudulent election. It took the regime days to muster an effective response. Well, Minnesota's welfare fraud disaster exposes a national system that's actually designed to fail. Welfare fraud in Minnesota seems to be a never-ending story. We're learning that scammers built multiple programs intended to help low-income families, including Medicaid, food aid, housing assistance, and child care programs. Based on what's been uncovered so far, the people who penetrated these schemes may have stolen as much as $9 billion. But while Minnesota's welfare fraud is practically brazen and systematic, it's not unique to that state. That's because the basic design of most U.S. welfare programs makes them highly susceptible to fraud. For example, for years, Medicaid has been on the U.S. government's Accountability Office list of federal programs at high risk for fraud, waste, and abuse. I reported fraud, waste, and abuse to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and their basic attitude was, so? GEO finds the program is insufficient federal oversight. 2024, it estimates, or more than $31 billion in erroneous Medicaid payments. That's particularly concerning because Medicaid is the biggest means-testing government welfare program, costing federal and state taxpayers about $900 billion annually. Unsurprisingly, Medicaid was also the source of most of the money stolen in Minnesota. Well, an Ohio dentist murder gun match is a big problem for the surgeon X, according to the defense attorney. Preliminary ballistic match linking a gun recovered from Michael McKee's Illinois property to the scene of a double homicide in Ohio of an Ohio dentist and his wife marks a big problem for him and his defense team. McKee, 39, a Chicago area vascular surgeon, faces 2 counts of premeditated aggravated murder in the December 30th shooting. Death of his ex-wife, Monique Tepe, 39, and her husband, Spencer Tepe, 37. Columbus Division of Police Chief Lane Bryant confirmed that multiple firearms were seized from McKee's Rockford, Illinois property, and a preliminary analysis through the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network linked one of those weapons to 3 9mm shell casings recovered from the Tepe residence. And according to R.J. Drilling, a defense attorney and former prosecutor with the L.A. District Attorney's Office, it's absolutely going to look like a big problem for him and his defense team. As a defense attorney, you want to explore as many avenues as you can in terms of defense. But if the gun matches the shells, it becomes almost what you call an open and shut case. Well, according to Jesse Waters, and he's right, the media is turning anti-ICE protesters into heroes, even when ICE officers are murdered. Well, according to Martin Gurry, President Trump has reaped a lot of global benefits by grabbing Maduro. Certain class of analysts are reported to be scandalized by the American night raid on Venezuela that snatched away strongman Nicolas Maduro and his wife. China's been given a green light to invade Taiwan. Russia's finally free to trespass, maybe into Ukraine. Even by today's declining standards, that line of analysis is pathetically shallow. Neither the president of China nor Vladimir Putin look to the U.S. for permission anymore. The opposite's close to the truth. They want to make trouble and undermine legitimate power. And unfortunately, they got the left helping them. Well, one last story. A recall has been expanded to nearly 1 million Frigidaire mini fridges sold at Target because of fire hazards. These recall mini fridges have electrical components that can short circuit and ignite the plastic used to make the product. And when plastic burns, that can be deadly. Recall of Frigidaire branded mini fridges has been expanded to 964,000 units after multiple reports of the product catching fire. That's according to the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission. Canada-based Curtis International initially recalled 634 mini fridges last summer, but added 330,000 another model to the alert on Thursday. So-called mini fridges have electrical components that can short circuit, and when that happens, it can absolutely go up in flames. And one news story that just came in. It's a new weapon in the U.S. military arsenal that's taking control of the battlefields. And hopefully, I'll have more information on that shortly. But right now, we're going to get back to the topic we started yesterday. I got a lot of emails talking about the fact that they wanted to hear more about remote viewing. For those who are not familiar with it, that's the concept of giving a psychic coordinates off a map, and the psychic tells you what's at those coordinates without looking at the map or knowing anything about it. Now, some make absolute fools of themselves. Others are remarkably accurate. And remote viewing has become an issue in the Area 51 scenario. As we were talking when we ran out of time yesterday, the U.S. Air Force has taken a lot of property under eminent domain to expand Area 51 in order to keep folks from getting close enough to it to see what's there. Now, there was an area called Freedom Ridge where you could go and literally look down on the facilities built around Groom Lake. But when that land was taken, for good of the country, of course, it's always national security, under the Eagle Act, the administration asked Congress to take all this land and give it to the Air Force. Now, did the Air Force have to prove anything? No, they just had to make a decent showing that not having that land damages security of Area 51. Now, it happened in the 1984 hearing. The administration asked Congress to regularize matters by withdrawing Groom Mountain area under the Eagle Act. And at the 1984 hearing, the issue was raised of the still pending administration proposal to designate as wilderness lands within the Desert Refuge and partly overlapping the Nellis Air Base Complex. In response, the Air Force testified they had been consulted in the process of formulating the administration's wilderness proposal and they had no reason to object to such a designation. And based on this, the subcommittee was prepared to incorporate into the Nellis withdrawal legislation provisions designating wilderness within the Desert Refuge in accordance with the administration's proposals. But then the Air Force and Department of Defense had an apparent change of mind and urged that such designation not be made. The Department of Interior continues to support the wilderness recommendation, though. A lot of this land just sits empty. The government doesn't do anything with it. They just don't want you to be able to go into it so you can see what's in the various areas they're trying to protect. Now, under the terms of a law that was signed October 17, 1984, the Groom Mountain area was withdrawn for military use until December 31st, 1987. By January 1st, 1987, the Interior and Air Force Departments had to complete and issue an environmental impact statement concerning continued or renewed withdrawal of the Groom Mountain area. And that environmental impact statement had to address certain possible measures to mitigate development in agriculture in Nevada. Well, the Nellis Air Force Range comprises the largest air and ground space available in the free world for peacetime military operations and training, and it's of extreme importance to the defense of the nation. Now, that's the government's position. It's important to note that this particular withdrawal doesn't represent any additional new lands to be withdrawn. During the 98th Congress hearings were held on this withdrawal, in addition to a proposal by the Air Force to withdraw 89,600 acres known as the Groom Mountain Range. Freedom Ridge is part of that. And because of the controversy surrounding the Groom Mountain Range, brought to the attention of the Congressional Committee by many Nevadans who testified, this committee agreed to require the Air Force to submit a separate environmental impact statement on the Groom Mountain Range. Now, I spent 4 or 5 days at the base of Freedom Ridge years ago, and it was a lot of strange sights were seen flying over Area 51. But because we couldn't get up on top of Freedom Ridge anymore, it was impossible to tell what they were. Now, undoubtedly, Area 51 wouldn't have attained the high degree of mystique and mystery that it has without the impact of a man by the name of Bob Lazar. He, more than anybody else, put both the base and the name solidly into the public domain. And it should be noted that others knew something of the tales of aliens at Area 51, which is added to the claims of Lazar. One of those individuals was a man by the name of Roy Byram. He provided tax-based services to some of the employees at Area 51 from 1976 to 1979. And several of Byram's clients quietly told him he knew of the alien craft held at Area 51 and how massive funding for the UFO programs is being siphoned from other government programs as a means of hiding the paper trail and the money. After Byram shared this information with journalist George Knapp, Byram was leaned on by the government agents and who paid him a less than friendly visit. That's the same thing that happened in regard to Roswell. In those days, they were called counterintelligence corps agents, and they came in and just threatened people with all kinds of punishments if they said a word about anything they might have seen or heard. And in the 1970s, several employees of a company called Holmes and Narver Corporation revealed certain data on Area 51's alien angle. Now, that was a company that provided engineering and construction services. And one of the sources, a former employee of Holmes and Narver, was a woman who worked in the Clark County court system, already was ready to speak with Knapp. This was quickly stopped, though, when the woman's life was threatened, as was that of her family. Also, pre-Lazar is the story of Doug Schroeder, electrical engineer, confided in Las Vegas TV producer Bob Patrick about what he was told was going on at Area 51. Namely, the reverse engineering of alien craft and extraterrestrial technologies. Although Schroeder stressed that in terms of actually flying the craft, not a great deal that all had been achieved. Knapp noted in 1991, Schroeder died in somewhat mysterious circumstances. Well, going back to Bob Lazar, certainly one only had to compare Area 51 in pre-Lazar and post-Lazar eras, and prior to Lazar making the controversial claims that practically made him a household name, the term Area 51 is practically unknown outside of the employees of the base. In the immediate aftermath of Lazar going public, though, Area 51 was like it had a bad rash. It was all over the place. For decades, the secrets of the base were well kept. Thanks to Lazar, they were soon unleashed to the world. But how and why and under what specific circumstances did Lazar become the poster boy for Area 51? Well, Robert Scott Lazar was born in 1959 in the Sunshine State of Florida. It's accurate to say that much of the history of Lazar's early years is swamped by mystery and controversy. We do know for sure that he signed up to take a class in electronics at Pierce College in California in the late 1970s. Also spent an unclear amount of time working for Fairchild, but undoubtedly he was actually employed there. Now, things become controversial and murky at this point. According to Lazar, he obtained a Master's of Science from Caltech, a Master of Science in Physics, the latter secured from none other than MIT, the prestigious Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Now, this claim has been dismissed by several high-profile figures in the field of ufology, including the nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman. We're going to talk more about that later. I had a number of conversations with Stanton Friedman about Bob Lazar, and as far as he was concerned, the jury was still out. The next thread in the winding saga of Bob Lazar came in the early 1980s, specifically 1982, when he was profiled in an article that appeared in the pages of the New Mexico-based Los Alamos Monitor newspaper. And that's where evidence came to light that Lazar did indeed work on a number of government defense-based programs of a sensitive and secretive nature. Much of that article was devoted to Lazar's love for fast cars. I mean, really fast cars. He had a friend from NASA took an old school Honda car, hauled out its regular engine, replaced it with one that was fueled with liquid propane, which is a pretty astonishing achievement by anybody's standards. And the new engine was made from titanium. For Lazar, 100 miles an hour wasn't fast enough, nor was 150. This car reached speeds of 200 miles per hour. But the Los Alamos Monitor article revealed something else as well, something that provides a great deal of food for thought when it comes to those who suggest or maintain that Lazar is nothing more than a Walter Mitty type character. As the newspaper article makes it very clear, at the same time that Lazar and his friends were zooming around the desert landscape of New Mexico, was in the employ of none other than what was back then called the Los Alamos Maison Physics Facility. Today it's the Los Alamos Neutron Science Center. It's the website for Lance states, for more than 30 years, the Los Alamos Neutron Science Center. That's LANSCE. They love these acronyms. Has provided the scientific underpinnings in nuclear physics and material science needed to ensure the safety and surety of the nuclear stockpile in the future. In addition to national security research, Lance User Facility has a vibrant research program in fundamental science, providing the scientific community with intense source of neutrons and protons to perform experiments supporting civilian research and production of medical and research isotopes. And the important part of this statement is the revelation that the Lance staff works in fields that revolve around U.S. national security. Well, the fact that we can prove that Lazar worked for the organization under its earlier name is notable in terms of demonstrating Lazar was definitely plugged into the world of government secrecy, even when he was just in his early 20s. Just a couple of months after the Los Alamos Monitor ran its feature on Lazar, the man of the hour had what many may have had, a fate-driven encounter with one of the most legendary figures in the world of physics. Somebody who became known as the father of the hydrogen bomb, Edward Teller. When Teller died in 2003 at the age of 95, the United Kingdom's Telegraph newspaper noted he was a man of enormous intellect, one of the most controversial scientific figures in the 20th century, made important contributions to the field of quantum mechanics and physical chemistry with his nuclear physics. But it was as an ardent Cold War warrior that he entered the popular mind. Well, demonstrating how easily Teller moved among some of the most powerful people on the planet. It was a story from the Telegraph. September 1982, Teller visited the White House for a meeting with Reagan's science advisor, which they discussed the feasibility of establishing an anti-ballistic missile system based on outer space. Thus was born a Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI, popularly known as Star Wars. Unexpected television address to the nation, Reagan called upon the scientific community who gave us nuclear weapons to give us the means of rendering those nuclear weapons obsolete. Star Wars was a controversial initiative, its development by bypassing existing treaties and arousing the indignation of the Soviet Union. Very feasibility remained hypothetical. Only its vast cost, budgeted for $40 billion, was That part was beyond dispute. On the day at which the two men met, Lazar sat in a lecture that Teller gave at Los Alamos. It wasn't so much Teller's lecture that amazed Lazar, but it was the fact that when Lazar was hanging around at the entrance to the facility, Teller was sitting on a wall and reading the very article that the Los Alamos Monitor had written about Lazar. It was actually a front-page article. And since Lazar had secured several copies of the issue of the newspaper when it was published, he instantly recognized what it was that Teller was so fixated on reading. So he decided to make a plunge. He walked over to Teller and told him who he was. Namely, he was the person profiled in that article because of his jet car achievements. Teller said he found it all very interesting. The two men talked for a while about their respective work, after which Teller headed off inside to deliver his presentation. Well, 6 years later, the paths of Lazar and Teller crossed again. It led Lazar into the world of Area 51, UFOs, and aliens, dead or alive, or maybe even both, and some of the most classified secrets of the U.S. government, or possibly of a powerful group that wasn't even answerable to Congress or the President of the United States. Alternatively, Lazar was the subject of strange, manipulative mind games. It's a question that pops up throughout his history. Is what he's talking about real, or is it Memorex? 1988, Lazar had a very different job than all those that came before him, living and working in Sin City itself, Las Vegas, Nevada, where he ran a photo processing store. Now, it was just a job, but as he said, it paid the bills. But it wasn't a dream job that Lazar wanted. That dream would soon come true, but it may have become a definitive nightmare. He decided to send out a resume to just about anybody and everybody he worked with, met or knew. And one of those, without surprise, was, of course, the Hungarian-born physicist Edward Teller. Also not surprising, Teller remembered all too well the young man with the liquid propane car that could zoom across the landscape at 200 miles an hour. Teller also remembered that Lazar had a background in physics. More importantly, Teller had power and influence and the ability to open doors and had access to some of the U.S. government's most prized and guarded secrets. And it was soon after that Lazar was contacted by an agent of Edgerton, Gummershausen, and Greer, in short, EG&G, which it's now officially called. It's a company that has undertaken numerous top-secret programs in support of the defense and national security of the U.S. Lazar met with staff from EG&G at an office in Las Vegas' McCarran Airport. Turned out to be a bit of a letdown, but one who had a distinct light at the end of the tunnel. Lazar was actually told he was overqualified for the position that they had in mind, but they had another project in mind that would be far more ideal for Lazar. All that Lazar was told at the time was that the program revolved around alternative and novel propulsion systems. And for somebody who built his own jet car, this sounded like something right up Lazar's alley. Wasn't long before he had his follow-up interview, once again at the offices at McCarran Airport. This meeting was a man by the name of Dennis Mariani. Can't talk. No-nonsense type who had the air of a military officer and turned out to be Lazar's supervisor. The pair flew out of the airport on what he was told was just a small trip. They arrived at a facility out in the desert, and Lazar was transported to a vehicle with blacked-out windows, and from there he was driven to a portion of Area 51. He came later to know that it was the area of Area 51 known as S4. When the weeks that followed, Lazar claimed he found himself in a world that was almost unbelievable. So he was informed that the previously referred to alternative and novel propulsion system was nothing less than extraterrestrial in origin and nature. Bob Lazar was about to start working on a spaceship built in another solar system. As for S4, according to Lazar, it was a massive facility. You couldn't know, but if you flew over it, you wouldn't know it was there. In fact, you'd probably scarcely know if you were on the ground either. Lazar explained that S4 is actually built within the surrounding mountains, which have been carefully and massively hollowed out. Within these reinforced hollow areas that all of the work on the alien craft was undertaken. Nothing could be seen from the sky. Even Google Map couldn't help you at this point. Practically nothing could be seen on the ground, and the whole facility was hidden in the mountains. The perfect location to work on and hide, and the flying saucer that Dennis Mariani told Lazar was stored at Area 51. In the S4 section of Area 51. Well, the story went on that the staff at Area 51 had no fewer than 9 alien craft in their possession. Now, most of them were in good condition. In fact, some were in excellent condition. One was superficially damaged, but not overly so. So it's hardly surprising Lazar was threatened with his life, no less, to never talk about any of this with anybody outside the program. That included his own wife, family, and friends. On this issue, he was told that to ensure that he told the line, his home phone would be tapped. Had to sign a document that starkly detailed the results of any violation of the agreement, which included lengthy jail sentences and even a visit from the Grim Reaper himself. That is, government agent with a flair for snuffing out lives. He was even told if he did not ever speak out of line, hypnosis and chemicals would be used to wipe out his memories of what he saw out at S4. Well, for Lazar, of course, this was all very ominous, but the stakes were so high, the ability to work on alien spacecraft. Too great a lure to say no to, so he eagerly signed away his life in an instant. Maybe all of us would have if we were given that opportunity. Well, it turned out that his time spent at S4 was short and for very good reason, as it will become very apparent shortly. But for those a brief couple of months he was secretly employed out at Area 51 complex, he was exposed to a great deal of material, all of it fascinating and bizarre. One of the first things Lazar was exposed to was a huge stash of highly classified papers that detailed the history of what the U.S. government knew about UFOs and alien presence on our planet. A presence that began thousands of years ago, maybe even tens of thousands of years ago. The files actually told a shocking story. All of our gods and deities were really aliens who'd engaged in a vast genetic experiment that mutated the likes of Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons into Homo sapiens. In that sense, we owe our very existence, not to heavenly creator of supernatural origins, but to scientists from another world. For somebody like Lazar, it was a stark wake-up call. Well, were the mountains the real deal, though, or were they ingenious disinformation? And I mean mountain of documents. That's an issue that comes up time and again. It's worth noting, too, that while the nature of the files was different, the issue of Lazar being flooded with files on UFOs and aliens almost as soon as he arrived closely mirrors the situation John found himself in at the base in the early 1970s, almost 2 decades before. I'm talking about John Lear. Primary reason why Lazar was brought on board, according to Lazar himself, was to see if he could offer some meaningful insight into the exact nature of the propulsion systems of the various craft held at S4. Reportedly, all the craft were powered by a super heavy element known as Element 115. An element that at that point in time was said not to actually exist on Earth. Was this issue one any other that led Lazar to believe the saucer-shaped craft he saw were alien craft rather than highly advanced aircraft of the U.S. military? Although the team of about 20 people with whom he worked were all highly skilled, they made very little progress when it came to fully understanding the technology. They had been able to raise the alien craft 20 or 30 feet into the air, but that was about everything that they were able to do. Well, the Area 51 team was deeply concerned if they brought in the most famous, finest minds on their planet, then the top secret operation would be quickly and drastically compromised. Of course, the big question was why the team relied on less than 24 personnel when they could have enlisted some of the most famous and brilliant minds in the world, keeping everything so low-key. The answer that Lazar received does make some bit of sense. The Area 51 team was deeply concerned if they brought in the most famous and finest minds on the planet, then that top-secret operation would be quickly and drastically compromised. I mean, it was feared that the finest minds wouldn't be able to resist telling the world that they were working on alien spacecraft, even in spite of the stringent security and threats of prosecution, jail, and death, so they took a very different and highly alternative approach. They chose to recruit guys like Lazar, who were definitive mavericks and who thought outside the box, and even more importantly, were not at all well known. All this ensured that the security surrounding the program stayed in place. The problem, though, was that by using mavericks, the progress was tortuously slow. That was the reason why when Lazar was first confronted by the alien technology, he realized just how little the staff at Area 51 really knew about the extraterrestrial technology that had fallen into their hands. And in some cases, literally fallen into their hands. Over the course of a couple of months, Lazar was given the most unique opportunity to examine the UFOs secretly stored at Area 51's S4, both inside and out. Something else had led him to believe that the vehicles were not of this earth. All the seats in the craft were tiny. Clearly didn't suit an average 6-foot-tall man. They were the perfect size, though, for a humanoid entity that was about 3 feet tall. Lazar also watched a few tentative flights of the craft, which were occasionally taken out of the confines of S4 and tested now and again, although to an extremely limited and restricted degree. Again, this was because of not being anywhere near conversant with the radical technology involved. They didn't know what a lot of those buttons and levers did. Notably, Lazar mentioned another issue. The Russians had apparently gotten wind of what was being tested out at S4, and as a direct result, they had spy satellites in orbit that were specifically targeting Area 51 with powerful cameras. Staff at S4 were fully aware of when and where the satellites would appear, so they would only ever test the craft outside when the Soviet satellites were near the area above Area 51. And it's hardly surprising that having allegedly been exposed to alien technology, intact spacecraft from another world or worlds, classified files on the origins of the human race and how we're supposedly the creation of manipulative ETs, Lazar was finding it more and more difficult not to tell anybody about the extraordinary secrets to which he'd been exposed. Eventually, and despite the danger he's obviously putting himself in, he blew the whistle. First person he told was his wife, Tracy. Also confided in a close friend, Gene Huff, and then to John Lear, whose father, William Lear, was the brains behind the Lear jet. At the time, John Lear was heavily into the UFO issue, pursuing any and all leads that might allow him to unravel the truth of what the U.S. government really knew about UFOs and alien life. It was his risky and drastic even decision that saw Lazar almost get killed. Really. For a brilliant man, Lazar made a few glaringly foolish mistakes. Turns out not only was his home phone monitored, but somebody had installed wiretaps in the home. Security personnel at Area 51 were listening in to everything that Lazar told his wife, which ensured that Lazar's time at Area 51 was almost certainly over. Additionally, as a result of the spooks at Area 51 surveilling Lazar's house, they soon learned that while Lazar was at work at S4, his wife was having a close encounter of a very different kind, those of the sexual virility with her flight instructor. Seems that somebody on the inside suggested if Lazar learned this, he had become unstable, maybe even blow the lid on what was afoot at the base. Well, he'd already started to do that, but if he found out what his wife was up to, he just might go off the rails, they thought. So Lazar was now officially a threat to national security. Then the strange and ominous things began to occur. It's evident that somebody, still unknown to this day, stealthily entered Lazar's house and installed yet more surveillance equipment. Lazar claimed that somebody shot out one of his tires while he was driving his car in Las Vegas, and something more sinister went down. Lazar got a call from Dennis Mariani, the man who had been responsible for getting him on board. Mariani had demanded Lazar return to Area 51, essentially to try to smooth matters out, although it was difficult to know how things might have been rectified, given that Lazar is starting to blab to family and friends about the alien technology at Area 51 and S4. Now, Lazar, normally thought of as an astute and clever guy, instantly wondered if the plan to get him back to Area 51 was a trick. He feared that maybe no attempt to be made to try to come to a compromise, but instead he just might be coming back for a bullet or several to his head. And to some, this might sound like paranoia, but not for Lazar. He was a very frightened man, worried that his bones would be buried in the desert, somewhere out at Area 51, never to be found. He knew what he had been exposed to, and he knew just how high the stakes really were. He had no doubts that termination with extreme prejudice was not at all out of the bounds at Area 51. So he did not take up Mariani's dark, disturbing request to return to the base, possibly for one last time. What he then did was to contact the media. In Lazar's mind, he was now a man on the run, a man who had made the first steps to revealing to the world that we're not alone in the universe. So he approached none other than investigative journalist George Knapp of Las Vegas's KLAS-TV. It was thanks to Knapp's intensive and extensive interviews, which in essence told the story we've been covering, that the saga about Lazar came cascading out. Those same interviews would soon ensure that Area 51 became a household name, even among those with absolutely no interest in UFOs. The no surprise, given the nature and content of his story, that some people believe the tales about Lazar are simply tales. The story weaved by Lazar himself as a means to make him money, to achieve fame and infamy, and maybe even significant stardom if Hollywood came along and offered a deal for his story, which they did, but failed to deliver on. One of those who had no faith in the Lazar story was a friend of mine, Stanton Friedman, a nuclear physicist whose deep interest in the UFO phenomena dates back decades. In fact, Friedman is a firm believer aliens did crash at Roswell in the summer of 1947. He also believes that Uncle Sam is more than a few dead alien bodies stored and preserved in military facilities around the U.S. At the same time, he had no intention of endorsing Lazar's controversial claims. He came straight to the point when he was interviewed, calling Lazar's story nothing but absolute bunk. Well, Lazar may not have been the liar that some concluded he was for a good reason. Typically, those who engage in hoaxes, particularly UFO-themed hoaxes, looking for something significant in return, such as book deals, industry appearance on the lecture circuits for hefty fees, of course, and big bucks Hollywood movies based on their lives. And Hollywood did take an interest in this story for a while, but Lazar never went on the unending lecture circuit for significant money. Hoaxes typically do something else, too, when the initial story's been worn out to the finest degree possible. They claim new experiences that allow them to continue their ruse for forever and a day. Lazar undoubtedly didn't fit this particular bill. He's never written a book about the time that he says he spent at Area 51's S4. He's not given permission for anybody to write a full-length book on his experiences. He's never elaborated on or embroidered on his original story that he put out in 1988 and 89. He tells exactly the same tales as that which he spoke of 30 years ago. None of this is the typical behavior of a skilled liar with an agenda, but it is the behavior of somebody who found himself in a strange and controversial world and who couldn't keep it to himself. And also, notably, is the matter of Edward Teller and what he really knew about Bob Lazar. Now, according to Lazar, it was all thanks to the famous physicist Edward Teller he got the gig out at S4. This implies that Teller himself, in all likelihood, knew exactly what was afoot at Area 51. Teller knew that we're not alone in the universe and knew that the government was hiding such a monumental fact from the people of Earth, the media and the scientific community, and hiding it at Area 51. And if all this was simply something Lazar had concocted off the top of his head, you'd expect Teller to have hit back, maybe even with a lawsuit. This scenario makes even more sense because Lazar didn't just keep Teller's story to himself, he revealed it publicly. That would have given Teller even more reason and ammunition to attack Lazar verbally and from a legal perspective as well. But Teller did not dispatch a team of high-powered and high-paid attorneys to hammer Lazar into the ground. No, Teller did something very different. He made a statement to the media that was so couched in careful terms that it became almost laughable. In fact, it sounded like the carefully chosen words that a lawyer would advise his or her client to use. What Teller said, I probably met him. I might have said to somebody I met him and I liked him after I met him, and if I liked him, but I don't remember him. All this sounds very much like Teller wanting the story to go away and to go away as quickly as conceivably possible in a way that didn't incriminate or implicate him in any fashion at all. The fact that Teller claimed not to have remembered Lazar is at significant odds with Teller's own recall of Lazar in 1988, 6 years after the pair had a brief person-to-person chat about Lazar's passion for super-fast jet cars. Teller clearly remembered that short chat more than half a decade after it happened, but suddenly when the issue of UFOs and Lazar is brought up by the media, his memory becomes hazy. Very hazy, or as in today's politicians are so keen to say under awkward circumstances, he didn't recall. And note as well that Teller never denied meeting Lazar, nor did Teller deny recommending him for a job. He simply said he didn't remember. Of course, if anything of a substantial nature surfaced in relation to Lazar's story, Teller could still claim he wasn't lying. He could maintain his memory wasn't what it used to be. And the fact that Teller claimed not to have remembered Lazar is at significant odds with Teller's own recall of Lazar in 1988, which is interesting to keep in mind. The fact that one of the world's leading scientists would not take legal action against a man who effectively said that Teller was part of a conspiracy to hide the truth surrounding UFOs and aliens held at Area 51 is extraordinary in itself. And yet that is exactly what happened. Hitler hemmed and hawed in what was an embarrassingly awkward fashion. Now let's look at another possibility where it comes to Bob Lazar. It's a theory that suggests that Lazar was telling the story as he saw it, but that he may have been the subject and the victim of an ingenious disinformation program aimed at the former Soviet Union. It is a fact that in the 1980s, specifically in the latter part of the 80s, the Soviet Union was deeply interested in what was going on at Area 51. They knew of the controversial land grab began in 1984 and that continued for a number of years. And the Russians were well aware that some highly radical aircraft had been secretly test flown out of Area 51 and immediately surrounding areas. And while the Russian espionage agents were spying on Area 51 and staying low in Las Vegas as a means to keep the U.S. government off their backs, Uncle Sam was fully aware that a number of Soviet spies were operating in Nevada, looking to find out what was afoot at the infamous base. The problem was the U.S. government, military, and intelligence didn't know where those Russian agents were exactly and who they were. So possibly as a means of smoking out those Soviet personnel and arresting them, disinformation specialist at Area 51 may well have used Lazar as a patsy, as a man who was used by American intelligence to spread tales about crashed UFOs and dead aliens and cosmic conspiracies. Lazar may well have worked out at Area 51's S4, and he may well have fully believed those briefing papers to which he had access and told tales of ancient encounters between the human race and aliens and genetic alterations to the human species made by advanced ETs. In that sense, Lazar is a completely unwitting figure in a strange mind game. On the other hand, maybe Lazar was a winning player, acting as the lone scientist willing to reveal the truth of an alien presence deep in the deserts of Nevada. And on that note, we come to the end of today's show because you've run out of time. We'll be talking more about Bob Lazar in future shows. But until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great evening.